We've looked a tiny little bit at the Anabaptists. We've looked some at the Roman Catholics. And these were the great competing theological ideas that occurred in the 16th century. And in that process, we've looked a little bit at the historical setting in which they emerged and to which they spoke. And now I'd like to talk a little bit more about the spread of these ideas. Because the Reformation was not just ideas and doctrines, as important as they were. The Reformation was every bit as much a reform in the life of the church. And that meant that preachers would carry the message of the Reformation into all of the countries of Europe. In some countries, they ended up not being very successful. For a time, there was success in Italy, in the city of Lucca, for example, by Reformed teachers. But there was great oppression there. The same happened in Spain, where there was a great deal of persecution that really shut down the Reformation at a very early point. In other parts of Europe, there was great success very early on, without a great deal of struggle or controversy because of early support by monarchs, such as in Scandinavia, where Lutheranism spread. So I want to begin in Scotland. Now, it would be much better if Sinclair Ferguson were here to do it with a Scottish accent, because it makes everything sound so much more spiritual and so much more profound with a Scottish accent. Occasionally, I try a Scottish accent, but it always seems to slip into Irish, so I will spare you that. Scotland, of course, was, in the 16th century, a separate kingdom from England, and indeed, most of the Scots didn't like the English very much. That may not have changed. We'll have to ask Dr. Ferguson about that. But Scotland historically had been more allied with France than with England, because France could be for Scotland a kind of counterweight to English influence. And Scotland had gone through a difficult period. Scotland was, in the 16th century, really kind of a third world country. It was not very wealthy. It had a kind of wild and woolly reputation, both for its nobility and for its common people. And they had gone through some real struggles as well in terms of the monarchy. King James V had died in battle in 1542, leaving just one young child behind, his daughter Mary, known to history as Mary, Queen of Scots. Not to be confused with Bloody Mary in England. Mary, Queen of Scots, was 1 week old when her father died, and she became queen. Her mother was part of the French aristocracy, and so that connection between Scotland and France was carried on because her mother became the regent in Scotland, in charge until her daughter would come of age. And Mary was actually sent to France to be raised in the French royal court for most of her life. She would actually briefly be married to first the crown prince and then the king of France, who died rather young, and Mary, as a young widow, would then later come back to Scotland. But that's getting a little ahead of our tale. The Reformation was carried to Scotland probably in the first place in the form of books. John Knox said it was merchants and mariners who first brought the Reformation to Scotland. And then it began to come through preachers. Those preachers began rather courageously to proclaim the gospel in the face of determined government opposition. And many of those early leaders were martyred. And it was in that context then that John Knox, the most famous of the leaders of the Scottish Reformation, came to faith.